I mentioned in the last video that what attracts me about a great piece of fiction is the characters and how real and human they can feel. Characters to me signify not just the skill of an actor, but the skills of the creator and how they can make a character feel, well, real and honest. It's why I prefer a cast of nobodies as opposed to a list of big budget actors that everyone knows. You fall into things like typecasting and tropes, like how everyone went up in arms over the new Mario movie in 2023, going off of who's the best fit for what character, even though the actual characters are the most cardboard cutouts of all time and can never truly evolve past the fact they're just marketing items. Big deal, Mario is a piece of toast with no real character, make your peace, you sweaty neckbeards. Insults aside, I think what makes the characters in Silent Hill 2 believable is both their vocal performances and their personalities. Now, I've seen people go on about how the voice acting is bad, and I've mentioned this before, but once again, I feel the way the characters all speak is perfectly fine, and while it's not the greatest, the actors have little touches in their inflections and mannerisms to them that makes them just really sound genuine. You know, it's like in New Vegas when you hear Ten of Spades' stutter because it's implied he has a speech impediment, but it just sounds forced and awkward, like someone who doesn't know how a stutter actually sounds like, or like when someone tries to do a Tourette syndrome impression and all they do is curse.
Ronald McGoddamn-Donald!
There's lots of little things you don't seem to notice until you go looking back for it, but you can hear the voice actors do add a little bit of flavor to each of their lines. It's like, you know, a piece of chewing gum with some ice stuck into it. No, really, try it out later, you'll thank me later. You can tell the performance for James is meant to convey a man who's mentally just sort of checked out. You can hear the slowness to his cadence that implies a lack of self-care, as well as things like how he always sounds uncertain, but in kind of this sheepish and uninterested way.
No, I believe you. It's just, I guess I really don't care if it's dangerous or not. I'm going to town either way.
You can hear the nervous highs in Eddie's voice when he starts to get stressed.
I was just joking, James. He was dead when I got here, honest.
You can feel the apprehension in Angela's dialogue when she's speaking to James.
In the cemetery.
I'll be okay by myself. Besides, I'd just slow you down.
And you can almost feel Maria's tongue sliding into your ear, and the tips of her nails almost piercing your skin as she lays her warm and moist... Oh wait, I think I copied something from my super secret adult novels that I write under my pen name. Point is, you can tell the voice actors really did nail their job, especially considering this was 2001. Voice acting for games and stuff really wasn't as serious as it is now, with the market being flooded with rogue and amateur actors. Then again, maybe you can't stand the woman who voices Angela. I don't know, maybe you can't get off without hearing the idea of Sam Jackson as James, like I said earlier.
English, motherfucker! Do you speak it?
It's all preferential and depends on the person's taste, but as far as I know, the HD version of SH2 that got released in a bundle pack a few years ago, that has both the original and new voice actors as options for the audio. I'd say go with what you prefer, but for the sake of this review and the fact I only own the PC version of SH2, whenever I talk about the delivery or use an example, I'll be drawing from the original voice lines. Oh, and if you are for some reason watching this video first because you're a contrarian and like to push my buttons, I'm also going to analyze the characters under the assumption that you've watched the videos before this one, so don't be shocked when I tell you that Snape kills Dumbledore in the end of the game.
Do I look like your girlfriend?
Avada Kedavra.
I swear, he was like this when I got here.
My name's James. James Sunderland.
Well, if it's really hard to guess at this point, you should know that James is the main character of Silent Hill 2. Our first impression of James based on the camera angle, the music, and the environment is that he's a somber, confused man, and likely not even sure of what he's doing. If we also go off the etymology of his name, Sunderland, we can derive the word sunder, which means fragmented or broken. And land, which I don't play MTG, I play Yu-Gi-Oh! And we're civilized, we use the term field card, okay? James is also derived from Hebrew, which can be interpreted as to replace or supplant. Put that all together and his name could be seen as replaces broken lands. Pretty metal, really. As I said earlier on, James's story before SH2 is kind of ambiguous, but from what we know, he was a store clerk and he visited Silent Hill with his now deceased wife Mary some time ago before she grew ill from a crippling disease. As should be common knowledge at this point, James suffocated Mary sometime into her treatments, possibly after years. From what we can gather from examining the bar in the nightclub, we can also see that James at some point began to turn to alcohol, but it wasn't enough to drown his sorrows. And no, I don't think that James was an alcoholic before he met Mary or after he killed her. I believe it's fairly evident that he simply tried drinking and it only made things worse or nothing seemed to change. James is also not someone prone to violence based on Mary's letter to Laura, and his overall quiet and hesitant demeanor. I believe that James's anger is a byproduct of his pain and not who he is as a person. We can see that in moments of anger and high tension, James doesn't actually dwell or fester on things and simply pushes through them with emotions and slowly reverts back to being submissive and downtrodden.
Or maybe you hated her.
Don't be ridiculous.
So it's okay?
Yeah, fine.
This is common for victims of depression or repeated trauma. I myself can actually vouch for this. Even if I get completely devastated by something or someone, I only process feelings of annoyance for a few moments and then either disintegrate into a crying mess from guilt, or simply revert back to a neutral or low emotional state. It's pretty clear that while James isn't a great person, I mean, yeah, he committed the ultimate sin of humanity. He killed his spouse in an act of uncertain selfishness, yet I don't really think he was a monster before Mary began to grow more and more decrepit. We see and know so little about James prior to the start of the game, but just based on how highly he valued his wife and how he argued with her physician about not doing the best he could, it's likely James had a very solid moral compass.
Mary's going to die? You must be joking.
I'm very sorry.
But you're a doctor. It's your job to heal people. How can you just let her die?
In his introductions to Eddie and Angela, we can also see that he's well-spoken, caring, inquisitive, and does seem to show some concern for the other two over the course of his journey into the town. Based on the scenes regarding Angela's want for suicide and Eddie's want for vengeance, James tries to give hope or advice, and even at the lowest points for the side cast, he tries to even tell Eddie he needs help, and refuses to give Angela back the knife from the start of the game. Like, come on man, James is such a bro, I mean look at him. He has persistence, he never gives up, and he really does seem like a kind soul, which makes his act of murder even more shocking and painful. You could argue that James is masking his true intentions or emotions. It's common for people with depression, but I really don't see it. He openly admits to Angela that he believes her about the dangers of Silent Hill, but he just doesn't care. He doesn't hold back on calling Eddie out. He apologizes to Laura for being short and temperamental with her. I don't think James is a liar or untrustworthy based on all the evidence the game shows us. He doesn't have anything to live for in his own mind, so why lie? Why bother manipulating people when the people around him seem to fuck their own lives up further? Why bother harming others when nobody actually harmed him? It's very clear that before Mary's death, James swallowed his emotions and felt that everything was unfair and falling apart. It's likely that work would have been difficult for him, and even Mary points out in the letter that she can see how hard it is for him to even see her in her most vulnerable and broken state. I've seen people try to use the sexualized aspects of Maria and the monsters to give the notion that James was into BDSM, or that he was some sort of big old horn dog, but no, I don't think so. Everything about James was subdued, in vitro, and repressed, to the point where he wasn't feeling anything at all, and yeah, surprise, surprise, I've been there. I've had my libido, my passion for my hobbies, and my own desire to live be destroyed by my own depression. Suppressing urges of any kind, voluntary or not, can create a disconnect from both pleasure and pain and can lead to dissociation, a lack of self-esteem, suicidal thoughts, and self-harm. You hear people who've self-harmed sometimes say, I didn't hurt myself to feel pain, I did it to feel something. And I've been there, and it's sadly one of those things that really only makes sense to those who've legitimately done it. It's like the Korn album's name implies. There's certainly a serenity in suffering that's neither good or bad, and knowing you can feel anything is sometimes what helps you cope and fight. I'm not advocating for self-harm, mind you, it's horrible, and I also scarred my body and mind from it, but I think James was never suicidal or self-harming, but the thoughts kept creeping into his mind at least numerous times. What kept James from ending his life then? Well, Mary. I think it should be pretty obvious that James's driving force is Mary, when she was alive and when she was dead. The couple didn't have children, so when James killed Mary, the world James was a part of no longer had any meaning, which allowed his delusions and distractions to flood his mind. It's clear that James also blocked out even thinking he killed Mary from trauma, And I've said before, it's entirely likely trauma and dissociation can absolutely obliterate and disorient someone's sense of time, place, and perspective. I spent years of convincing myself that a girl that I thought still cared about me didn't abandon me, because she cared about me before, and even though I thought it was a dead relationship, I forced myself to ignore the truth until she eventually said it herself. To say that someone couldn't do what James did, well, you've clearly never been in denial, and I genuinely envy you. If we consider that James isn't also some sort of heroic or interesting person, it makes him more tragic and realistic. Like I said, I can't get invested in characters that are overly competent or overly capable. I mean shit, consider your spouse is suddenly terminally ill and there's no sign of improvement. Consider what that would do to you. It would be torture, and no amount of preparation can make that an easy pill to swallow. I mean, I'm not a traditionalist, fucking look at me, but I also view marriage as a special and sacred ceremony, unlike contrarian millennials and zoomers that want to say marriage is a joke and something that you put down on your tax filings. Fuck the religious fluff that got thrown into wedding ceremonies, and fuck the whole marriage is what makes you property adage that came from abusive monarchies. Marriage is a ceremony of humanity that's been passed on for thousands of years. To lose a spouse, figuratively and literally, is losing your other half of what makes you... you. Whether James lost Mary to sickness or by his own hand, it's completely irrelevant. The pain is soul-shattering, and the build-up to it was likely equally as devastating. Consider that your spouse is lying there, dying in pain and lashing out. You know that their survival is slim to none. Seeing other people will inevitably cross your mind. We're a social species, as cliche as that sounds to say, but how can you just forget and move on when a person you've committed your entire life to is just dying? Can you even accept that fact? I'd also like to add humans are hardwired for physical intimacy. You can cross your arms and scoff thinking you're above the world for abstaining from sex like some sort of ultra neo-Puritan. That's cool. I did that for almost a decade, and all it did was decimate my mind to deny a basic human instinct. Sex isn't just some sort of animal need, it's a huge display of trust, emotion, and passion for humans, and we are one of the few species of animals on our planet that we know of that can actually take pleasure in the act of intercourse, rather than use it as some sort of strictly reproductive tool. Just the act of being close to someone we're intimate with releases chemical responses in our bodies that can lower blood pressure, help ease the mind, and cultivate a sense of trust and safety. It's not just that James wasn't putting his penis into Mary that caused him pain, no. It's that James was likely alone, physically and mentally, for the duration of Mary's final moments on Earth. Consider that Mary points out in her letter to James that the doctor says she might be able to go home for just a while. Like, really put that into perspective. Imagine waking up alone and meandering your way to work. Imagine having to stand at a register day in, day out, forcing a smile and some small talk to not only clientele, but also your coworkers. Now imagine coming home to no kids. No smile, nothing. Your checks are also likely being spent on outrageous and ever-growing medical bills that your measly insurance can barely cover. You're only able to see someone you love a few times in the month, and when you do, you're not truly alone with them. They're sick, in pain, and their mind is a whirlwind of fear and terror that you can't fix. You make dinner for yourself, alone. You crawl into bed, alone. In a house that now feels like a prison. And you know you're eventually going to be truly alone from the other person's death. You can't even put your hand on them to comfort them, or hear their heartbeat from their chest, or feel the warmth from the cold at night. Is that fantastical? Is that something that only a handful of people have ever experienced? Is that something a little too real? Did anything I say in the last few paragraphs elicit a knee-jerk reaction of discomfort? If you couldn't tell, this is why I say there's a level of maturity involved with characters like James that you don't get with modern writing and storytelling. It's either all the way or just surface level. With James, anyone can take a look at any frame from the cutscenes of SH2 and be able to piece together his background and also able to relate in some way, or at least come close to understanding what it's like to be him. James really is a broken man in every sense of the expression. His life is essentially meaningless. If he goes back to life, he's either a felon, financially broken, or mentally broken from the inevitable acceptance of having committed a murder. If he chooses to die, he's at least with his wife and his pain will be over, but his life will have been cut short, just like Mary's, and likely affect his remaining family and friends on top of Mary's remaining family and acquaintances. There's no easy solution. and Silent Hill as an entity in the story knows this, and creates an out for James when he arrives.
So, you're Maria?
I am. If you want me to be.
It's safe to say the most important side character that James comes across in the story of SH2 is Maria. Not only is Maria important in understanding how James works as a character, but she's important to show just how dangerous and magical the town of Silent Hill is. And that's magic with a K, mind you, since you know it's serious shit. Maria does have a side campaign that was released later on titled Born from a Wish, but I'll be looking at that some other day, and I think it deserves its own video in the future. Regardless of Born from a Wish, Maria came into existence when James was drawn to Silent Hill. It's clear that the town tailored her to be an ideal version of what Mary was, based on James's subconscious and suppressed urges. She wears somewhat revealing clothing, talks with an air of sensuality, and also has a fairly carefree attitude and demeanor. She also has a tattoo of a butterfly on her midriff, which can be interpreted as a symbol of rebirth as well. The name Maria can be stemmed from Latin to mean of the sea, or rebellious, and is also another name that's similar to Mary, like Miriam or Mariah. If we go from the of the sea meaning, the sea has historically been considered a dangerous and chaotic place, and this could also tie in the fact that she's born from James's chaotic and fragmented mind. The rebellious interpretation could also relate to her provocative outfit and mannerisms as well. Likely, my mind leans on her name being an alternative name similar to Mary to lure James's psyche to find her more appealing. We first see Maria in Rosewater Park, and I find it curious and unsettling how there are no other enemies in the park. It's just her. At first glance, James confuses Maria as Mary, even going as far as to smile with some excitement at the prospect of seeing her again. After a bit of playful banter, she eventually does switch to some seriousness as James actually considers going on through the town without her, prompting her to panic.
You're coming with me?
You were gonna just leave me?
No, but...
With all these monsters around?
No, I just...
I'm all alone here. Everyone else is gone.
This is likely to get James to feel sympathy for her, as remember, Maria is a construct of the town's energy, and is still a monster at heart, designed to get under his skin. She's the vor monster of the game that you just don't know about. Now, in regards as to why she won't go into the bowling alley, I think it's because she's a monster and nobody else could see her but James, so she more than likely didn't want to make James question her existence or not. Or she just plain sucks shit at bowling, but I think it's the former. We can also see that as James follows her, she guides him over to the nightclub she works at, which I've always seen as a not so subtle way of her trying to seduce James somehow. I mean, he sure as hell isn't trying very hard. You can also see that the neon sign in the bar is likely a pregnancy metaphor. I've always thought of this as showing that Maria can bear the children that Mary couldn't give James. Whether or not that's actually possible, I mean, human to monster bits could be... interesting? I still feel that's the intended purpose of the sign, though. While Maria is in the hospital with James, she also appears to start growing ill, which she just regards as a hangover, likely to make James feel worry as she pops a pill and lays down, yet again attempting to lull James into a vulnerable state. Somehow she also ends up in the other world, and when she reunites with James, she begins to emasculate him, likely mirroring Mary's volatile mental state to try and garner more sympathy.
You couldn't care less about me, could you?
No, I just...
Then stay with me. Don't ever leave me alone. You're supposed to take care of me.
We can also see as the audience this doesn't entirely work when she hugs James, because he just sort of stands there trying to hide his stiffy. We also get a small glimpse into the fact that Maria not only has her own personal identity, but she shares some of Mary's memories and traits as well, and she also feels empathetic towards Lara. This concept is further expanded on in Born from a Wish, but like I said, some other time. Regardless, Maria gets killed by Pyramid Head, and I've always viewed this as the town forcing James to feel like he can't keep Maria safe, just like how he couldn't cure or console Mary when she was ill. It's also something you might not notice on your first time through the game, but if you're playing on hard mode, you understand way too well. Pyramid Head is always going to beeline straight towards Maria and not James. There's some obvious programming stuff to this, but I feel like if Maria wasn't with James in this instance, Pyramid Head wouldn't have even cared, and he likely would have killed her at some other junction. Since the two are both theoretically allied to the town, I feel like Pyramid Head killing Maria is a totally planned act to torment and bring James further down, but we'll talk about Mathman later. As far as Maria having an idea that she was going to die, I think personally, yeah, she knew she was going to get killed here in some form or another, because even though she clearly has some form of actual self-consciousness or personality, she's still a puppet of the town designed to torment and trap James. Shockingly, the next time we see Maria, it's all the way into the labyrinth near the end of the game. I've always viewed her appearance here as being made possible by the lower depths of the town having some sort of stronger energy as opposed to the upper section. This is still my favorite moment in the game because of Maria fully embracing the fact she's able to be molded to whatever James wants, and she actually succeeds in getting him to at least make some sort of effort to get to her, regardless if he was sexually into her or not. I feel he's more motivated to try and save her, rather than do the dirty, because Maria is appealing to his sense of wanting to save and protect Mary when she was ill, and that's why she dies on his return. I've always interpreted this as the town itself killing her to further punish James and remind him of murdering Mary, as well as enforce a sense of defeat, just like with the elevator scene. I'll talk more about this later, but for now, I think the entire point of Maria's deaths are to intentionally make James repeat an endless cycle of guilt and shame, as no matter how hard he tries, he will never fully save or be with Maria. And I feel this is enforced in the Maria ending, when she starts to sound ill and essentially repeats the process of what happened to Mary, but possibly for all eternity, as punishment for James not having learned anything. Yet again, Maria takes a backseat for a long time, and her last standard appearance is at the intro of the Pyramid Head boss fight. We can see she's tied to a bed frame and stabbed, sending James to his knees, where he fully admits that Pyramid Head and Maria were both designed to punish him, but he's learned the truth and wants to fight back. Regardless of the ending the player is going to receive, I feel that this moment was designed to snap James back into a panicked and broken state, as he was actually breaking the town and going against it, and this was its last-ditch effort to try and bring him back to a state where he was earlier by any means necessary. After the fight, it's entirely dependent on which ending the player has chosen if the final boss is Maria or Mary, but for the sake of simplicity, I'll just make the assumption that we're looking at this from the Leave ending, where the manifestation is Maria but dressed as Mary. This cutscene always stuck with me because it goes further into the idea that Maria is so well constructed by the town that she actually shows some genuine want for James to be with her.
But I can be yours. I'll be here for you forever. And I'll never yell at you or make you feel bad. That's what you wanted. I'm different than Mary. How can you throw me away?
I think it's the voice work here that emphasizes the desperation that Maria knows she will cease to exist now that James admits he doesn't need her and has forgiven himself. I also view the monster design here as alluding to not only the Flesh Lips fight from earlier, but also as a sort of metaphor for both the crucifixion of Christ and the Virgin Mary from Christian mythology. We can see what looks like thorny spikes on the end of the bed frame, similar to the crown of thorns worn by Christ during his crucifixion, as well as the fact Maria's arms form a dominating T-pose. This also may be a reference to the Cross of St. Peter, or as a bastardization of occult imagery, like with how the incubus looks similar to Baphomet, or how the Order's symbol is a hodgepodge of various alchemical and occult symbols. For some Satanist and occultist practitioners, the upside-down cross usually interprets as a disrespect towards Christianity or organized faith as a whole, but this depends on who you ask, and as an ex-occultist myself, I don't view it as anything more than edgy imagery, meant to instill fear of the unnatural, and I think that's likely what they were going for here in the game. We can see that Maria can't move her head fully due to some metal device, and I'm sure this may be a stretch, but this could likely also be a subtle similarity to Pyramid Head's helmet design that reinforces the idea of sharp, uncomfortable angles. But I also think that this design is slightly intentionally reminiscent of religious and occult imagery. Most all holy figures in Christian mythology can be seen with a halo behind their head to symbolize the person's importance to God. If we look at the shape of the thing around Maria's head, it's an inverted triangle, which, yeah, to a normal person will just say, well shit Seth, that's a fucking triangle, how deep can you really make that? An inverted triangle has also been associated as a symbol of femininity, likely because of how women's bodies tend to curve and the design of the uterus. Also, ancient alchemical symbols represent water as an inverted triangle. Bet you didn't expect symbolic history with Seth today, but here we are. Also note that Maria's wearing a wimple, not a habit, but the design is meant to evoke imagery synonymous with the Mother Mary, which, is also a play on the whole Maria Mary naming scheme. So yeah, Maria's life has ended as quickly as it was born into existence, and I still think she's one of the most interesting characters in a game, because while she's still a manifestation of James's mind and the town's magic, she's clearly got some agency, and when you put that into perspective, it's almost tragic. She existed out of punishment and lust, but she still has a mind, memories, instincts, fear. It's really something understated, but when you think about it, it gets darker and darker and makes Maria even more memorable and one of my favorite characters in fiction. There's probably someone that's salty, but I really want to make a separate video for the sidecasted characters because, well, I really don't want to make one massive video with a million small edits, so please understand, it's not just for me, but for the sake of Sony Vegas. I mean, Jesus, you don't even know until you've done it, man. So join me next time for the supporting cast of the story where we get to talk about everyone's favorite character, the pizza.